Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Todd. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Dr. Todd Podcast. In today's episode, I want to talk about men, emotion, and relationships. So here's the deal. One of the things that I hear all the time is men need to be more emotional. Men need to show up more emotionally in relationships. And there's some truth to that, but it's not necessarily that men need to be more emotionally effusive. It's more that men need to be more emotionally present, particularly during times when their partner is experiencing distress. Because one of the things that tends to happen with guys, right? And I think that this is just part of our genetics. This is part of how we evolved throughout history, is that when we see somebody who we love in distress, or they're hurt, or they're struggling, or something like that, we tend to just kind of go into a little bit of an emotional shutdown, go into the problem-solving protector mode, and we like get into this whole, this is what you should do. Let's figure out how to solve this, right? Let's get into a problem-solving mode to try to solve the issue that you're facing right now that is causing you distress. And the reason why guys do that, it's not because they're insensitive, and it's not because they don't care. It's not because they don't want to be present. In fact, if anything, the opposite is true. What happens with a lot of guys is that when we see our partner upset, it triggers something in us where we also feel upset. We feel some anxiety, and the natural place for guys to go, instead of just expressing that anxiety or expressing that sadness or sharing in the emotional experience with our partner, particularly a female partner, we tend to get more into the protector mode. We tend to get more into the let's solve this crisis mode. And it is a way that guys are naturally wired. If you think about men and women, back in the day, right? Even 10,000 years ago. In fact, if you think about like when human beings first started walking the planet, it was about 300,000 years ago, right? I mean, it was a long, long time ago. And it wasn't until really the Industrial Revolution, and to some degree, even before that in agriculture, but let's even be generous and say, like 6,000 years ago, between 6,000 years ago and 100,000 and 300,000 years ago, men and women were primarily tribal hunter-gatherers and would travel around hunting for food and eating berries and going on hunts and combating with warring tribes and all of those kinds of things, right? Right up until about, the agriculture and raising farm animals and all of that kind of stuff, animal husbandry and the establishment of civilization where, cities were established, towns were established, and they started to grow. If we were to look at an hour on the clock, that the amount of time in kind of this modern era when people were settled into cities was only about like the last 4 seconds on an hour clock. The rest of the time, human beings lived under very different circumstances, and one of the natural demands on men, because we tend to be bigger, we don't carry children, we don't feed babies and all of that. We're the ones who have to go out and hunt and kill and protect and solve problems during times of crises, right? And so the men who survived were the ones who, during times of crisis, could just kind of emotionally numb out and really get into strategic thinking and like, how are we going to navigate through this? How are we going to problem solve this, right? I mean, what are the things that we have to do? What are the steps that we have to take in order to navigate through this current crisis? Then once the crisis is over, right? And then all of that emotion starts coming back up. I mean, a lot of the guys would become bumbling idiots, but during the time of distress, we were wired to go into that kind of logical problem-solving place. Unfortunately, in modern society, when the crises that we face are not necessarily life or death, at least in Western civilization for the most part, that natural genetic wiring can get in the way of our ability to be present with our partner when it feels like there is some kind of crisis happening, right? So there's this tendency to just go into this problem-solving space. And the problem is that for our partner, that can feel like we are not present for them, that we are not hearing them, that all of a sudden, as soon as they are experiencing something or become distressed or start to express some anger or something like that, that we go away, we disappear emotionally. We might physically stay there, but instead of being emotionally engaged, we go into this, well, are you thinking about this correctly? Well, let's think about what you need to do in order to fix it. You need to go in and tell your boss a thing or two, right? We go into this kind of problem-solving mode. So I would argue that men are just as emotional as women are. It's just that our experience of that is a little bit different, at least for most men. And unless men are able to develop some emotional skills and some emotional insight and put language to what they're feeling, men can oftentimes go from being engaged and, being happy and all of that, and to all of a sudden just like numbing out in like a nanosecond, right? And so the more important thing, I think, instead of men necessarily needing to be more emotional per se, is that we need to learn how to be more present. We need to learn how to remain present when our partner is struggling instead of going into that emotional shutdown space. In fact, I would even argue that that's what women want too. Women tend to not want a man to all of a sudden start crying and becoming emotionally unglued when they're crying and emotionally unglued, because then it's like, now I don't feel like I'm getting support. I feel like I have to support him, right? I feel like I have to be there for him. In fact, there was a funny instance when I was in, I don't even remember what class it was. When I was in graduate school in clinical psychology, there was a woman who was in our class who, she was in the program. She was going to become a doctor in clinical psychology. And she was talking about being at a movie with her fiance. And there was a particular point in the movie when, he started to tear up and started to get really emotional. And she talked about how it made her very, very uncomfortable. And she said, it's so crazy. I'm a therapist. I'm training to be a therapist. It's like I want men to be more emotionally available and to be able to cry and to be able to do all of those kinds of things. But she noticed that even she started to get very uncomfortable when he was becoming emotionally expressive, and not emotionally expressive like joy or, and being emotionally available for support, but it was when there was some emotional sensitivity or he started to cry or things like that. And what she described is is a very interesting phenomenon and is one that I have experienced myself. I don't even remember what what it was, it was many, many years ago. I was over at a friend's house, and there was a woman there who was a good friend of mine, and it was actually her place. I don't know if she's having a party or something like that, but I had experienced a death in the family. My cousin had just died, and I started getting, started tearing up as I was talking to her, and I just saw this shut down in her, and she said, I think you better go. And I was like, wow, what a weird thing. It's like, how many times have you been crying and I've been there for you, and here I've had a death in my family, and I started tearing up, and all of a sudden that made you feel so uncomfortable that you asked me to leave. And it wasn't like I was a blubbering idiot, right, and blowing my nose in the curtains. It was just that, I was starting to tear up and get kind of emotional about, about the death of my cousin. And that is actually a pattern that a lot of men experience, right? It's like the moment that, from a very, very young age, the minute that men start expressing some of those more sensitive emotions, there's this messaging that comes not only from other guys, right, where they're like, dude, take off your skirt and man up, right? I mean, but also from women. Women give very, very strong messaging that it is not okay for a man to express those kinds of emotions. Strength, courage, absolutely, but sensitivity is one that men oftentimes get a lot of signaling around from both men and women that is just not an okay emotion to express. In the combination, I think, between our genetic heritage of wanting to go into that logical mind whenever there's some kind of crisis coming up, or whenever there's some kind of disagreement, or there's feelings that are coming up where things are uncomfortable, or there's some aggression or something like that, we'll tend to go into that problem-solving space. But there's also a kind of a lack of emotional language and a lack of emotional development that oftentimes happens in men because of the messaging, social messaging that we get from both men and women around emotional expression. Now, there's certain emotions that are fine. I mean, in sports, aggression, leadership, strength, resilience, all of those kinds of things are really celebrated in men. And in women, it tends to be a much more wide palette of emotions that tends to be fostered socially. And so when it comes to relationships, oftentimes the disconnect between men and women when they're in a committed relationship and something comes up is that women oftentimes have much more emotional language. They have much more emotional awareness because they have had years and years and years of being able to express themselves and having other people kind of talking with them and supporting them and all of that, where with guys, it's just a different deal. The reason why I'm having this conversation, right, is not that we want to say, ha, 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 look at how men suck, because that's just not the case, right? There are certain differences between men and women in how we experience and how we navigate through emotions. And some of those are genetic in origin, and others are more in how we're socialized by gender, with men and women. And it's not necessarily that there's anything inherently wrong with that. The bottom line with all of this, right, is that we don't necessarily need to have men be more emotionally expressive, right? I mean, they don't have to mimic women when it comes to emotional expressiveness. But what a lot of guys do need to work on, right, is being more emotionally present and being able to put language to what they're experiencing and being able to communicate that. In fact, that's one of the first things that I work with a lot of couples who come in, to see me, to work on their relationship, right, is working with the guys to start putting some language to what's going on in their gut, right? And we do a lot of emotional language, a lot of emotional communication stuff in relationship therapy, because that emotional bond between partners is the relationship. That is what organizes everything, right? And whenever that is strained, whenever that is broken, that's when you start getting conflict. That's when you start getting problems in the relationship. And so when emotions are starting to run high and either either partner is starting to get triggered, if a dude starts going into emotional shutdown and emotionally disengages, that typically causes an escalation in the relationship, in the conflict, or in this situation as a whole. But if the guy can just stay present, don't go into problem-solving space, right? Just listen and be present, and just notice the fact that you might have some emotional stuff going on, right? And depending on what's been going on in the relationship and what the history is with your partner, she may be coming at you with some stuff because perhaps there's been a history of things not necessarily going well in the relationship, particularly during times of distress. And so even just being able to just remain present without judging anything, without responding to anything, and just listening and exploring, just like, all right, tell me more about what you're experiencing. Help me understand what's the distress? What is the thing that's bothering you? What's going on? Just so that you can seek to understand, asking questions to get your partner to engage more, rather than getting into a problem-solving space where now you're telling them, right, what they should do, or questioning the validity of their perceptions. It's like, well, did that really happen that way? Or maybe you're misinterpreting things, instead of doing that, just remaining present. And it's like, help me understand what you're experiencing right now. You obviously look very upset. What's going on? How can I be helpful? Right? Just asking some of those engaging questions, is a way of just remaining present when your partner is distressed. And just by being present, just doing that little thing of just asking questions, it's like, help me to understand, tell me more, what's going on? Just doing that little thing rather than kind of emotionally shutting down and going into a problem-solving place, or Mr. Fix-It kind of place, then that would do a lot for just kind of keeping conflict from escalating and helping your partner feel heard and supported, and like the two of you remain in collaborative space. The more that you can just remain present, don't shut down, even if she's like coming at you, just don't react, just remain engaged and hear and listen. And you can certainly remain aware and pay attention to what is being triggered inside here. But just by remaining engaged, that will do a lot for your relationship. It really will. It'll help a ton. And and right now, it with our kind of the cultural toxic masculinity and all of that other kind of stuff, and just shaming around masculinity and maleness in general, there's an added layer of sensitivity with a lot of guys, where it's like, if I feel any sense of judgment, or I feel like I'm being blamed or shamed or anything like that for being a dude, or responding the way that, I'm going to use big air quotes here, right? Guys do, right? I mean, I know as soon as I say that, there are going to be people who leave comments. It's like, oh my God, I don't respond like that, right? It's like, I get it, right? We're kind of bowling over nuance with a steamroller here. But by and large, and I've seen this pattern over and over and over and over and over again, that guys will tend to be very, very sensitive to judgment, to being hearing messages like you're not doing it right, or you're doing it wrong, you're not enough, you're not doing things correctly, you're not, this is your fault. Those kinds of things can be really, really triggering for a guy. And those are the kinds of things in particular when we're feeling shamed or blamed or something like that will tend to lead to that emotional shutdown. For whatever reason, whenever we're feeling that sense of emotional shutdown, right, just to notice that is happening and just use some of our internal strength and some of our resilience and just saying, okay, I can feel that stuff coming at me. I can feel the barbs coming at me, or I can see that my partner is distressed and I really, really want to fix them. I really, really want to help them. Even if it's like, they're not blaming me, but they're just upset and I want to fix it. It's like, just slow down for a minute, just notice that and just remain present and just ask some questions about what are you experiencing, what's happening right now. Because you'd be surprised that even when a partner is coming at us and being very, very critical, just by slowing down and just saying, I can tell that you're very upset right now. What's going on, right? And asking questions that get them to engage will do wonders. That will help a lot. So I hope you found this useful, and I will see you in the next episode. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.